Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and joining me today as I interview Crime Writers Canada members who are been nominated for the Awards of Excellence is Iona Whishaw. Hi, Iona. How are you today?
Hi, Eric. How are you? I'm great. You?
I'm good too. It's sunny outside, and as we were saying before, I'm going to have to hit my garden next after this. But before then, great to have you around to chat. You and I have done a few interviews about this book, but I love Framed in Fire, and I'm so happy to be talking to you again about it.
Thank you.
Well, just for those of you who don't know Iona Whishaw is a retired high school principal who has written 10 best-selling novels in her Lane Winslow series, which takes place in a tiny community in south central British Columbia near Nelson, just after the Second World War. Her main character was inspired by her own mother, who was involved in intelligence work during the war. Iona lives in Vancouver with her husband and a good sturdy raincoat. Her 10th book, To Track a Traitor, launched last week and was #1 in Canadian fiction books, and this week also appeared on the #1 best BC bestseller list. Before we talk about To Track a Traitor, her newest book, let's talk about Framed in Fire, which has been nominated for the Whodunit Award for Best Traditional Mystery, sponsored by Jane Doe. Iona, I hope you don't mind, but I'd really like to talk about the themes of the book today, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I was trying to put it in my own words with the question I wanted to ask you, and I was maybe struggling with it a little bit. But then I was rereading your book's description on your webpage, so I'm going to borrow from there. Framed in Fire is bound up in a difficult questions of community and belonging. The knowledge that trusted neighbors can sometimes be as sinister as a stranger in the dark. You essentially have there's many plot lines, but two big plot lines in this book. For me, my favorite scene that I've read in a long, long time is when Lane meets up with Tom, an Indigenous man, in the field, and they start a conversation. Well, let's say it in your own words. Could you tell us a little bit about Tom and why you want to write about him?
Yes, I'm very fond of Tom, actually. One of the things that I learned that I think really precipitated my desire to write this book was looking up the Sinixt, in history. Who were they? And I discovered that the British Columbia government declared them extinct in 1956. And I was really just struck dumb by that. How obviously they're not extinct, so I was really motivated to try to look at who some of these people were. And one of the things I learned is that the territory of the Sinixt is a great big square encompassing the Columbia Valley, and it goes up into British Columbia and down into Washington. And an awful lot of the nation were just moved south at the turn of the century. And by this, I mean the turn of the 20th century, because of mining and damming of the river. They were, ruining their salmon fisheries and, the farming and all of these things just kind of pushed them out, right? And I was really interested in learning that one of the things that the Sinixt people were doing was periodically coming back to touch base with their old lands, And one of the things I heard Marilyn James say in an interview was somebody asked her about whether she felt the land belonged to them. And she said, no, it's that we belong to the land. So I had this real, and people were riding back and forth on horses, and I just thought that was such an intriguing thing. So I really wanted for Lane, who's a new immigrant to Canada, and for Darling, who's lived most of his life in Vancouver and just come to Nelson to work in the police department there, to meet some of the people that they wouldn't have known anything about. And in fact, for me, it was a big exploration because I knew nothing about them either. So for me, it was a real treat to learn about these people and to learn about what they did and where they lived. And, that meeting between Tom and Lane is really, for me, the that moment, where the indigenous person meets the immigrant to the country. So, Tom is they have some things in common. Tom is a veteran like she is. He fought with the 104th for the United States. And so they both have a very thoughtful approach to the world now post-war. And for him, he was a bit hesitant. He thought if he could just ride around her, he could probably avoid trouble, but she was there waving and yahooing, hello. So they did meet and sit down and have some cookies together, and then unfortunately discover this long buried body together as well in Mr. Barasov's land. So, Tom, there's a moment later in the book where Lane and Tom, Lane's I don't want to blow the story, but Lane's been captured, and she and Tom exchange almost unspoken kind of sharing about how they're going to work together to end this situation. And that again refers back to the fact that both of them were warriors, in the recent war. So it was a really enjoyable thing to write about Tom, really, honestly.
As much as it was a joy to write about Tom, I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak about your book before, and I've heard you talk about sort of how your publisher was a little hesitant about you speaking about Indigenous issues. Could you sort of tell us the process that you went through in order to get it right?
Yes, I mean, for me, it was urgently necessary to get it right. Really, because I want very much to, I reflect quite a few communities in my books. The Doukhobor community, there's some Japanese people, there's, that immigrant community from the Sudetenland, the home children. I just want to make sure that I get those things right. So I had the very good fortune to meet Dr. Price, who was an anthropologist who had worked with Marilyn James, who is known as the mother of the autonomous Sinixt and is recognized as such by the BC government, who is working and has been working since the 80s on a reburial project. And I said, gosh, I would really love to write a book that included her people. And she said, well, you're going to have to meet her and all of that. So after meeting her, and she was just delightfully excited about the whole idea. She fell in with the, when you're talking about a story and somebody says, well, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And she really fell in with that, and so we had a very enjoyable discussion. And then, she walked me through the burial ceremonies and all the things that, how the Sinixt were traveling up and down from Washington up into Canada to touch base and all of that. And so I said to my publisher, of course, one is anxious, but my rationale for doing this is I think not only should we know about this, but also the people in my book should know about it. Lane and Darling should know about it, that it's not just a clean, pristine land that nobody's ever been on before. People lived here, and they lived here for thousands of years, as the archaeological evidence at Lemon Creek, for example, shows. That could go back 3,000 to 5,000 years. So, I think my publisher was anxious for me to get it right. And, we had a sensitivity reader, and then we sent the book into the world. And so far it's been okay.
Another issue that you tackle is the story of the Vitalis and how their beloved restaurant, which we thought everybody in the community loved, is I don't know, firebomb's not the right word, but arsoned. Somebody tried to burn it down. That is a different sort of injustice that obviously Italians would have went through that I never even really thought about right after the war. So could you talk a little bit about the flight that the Italians had to go through, and the Vitalis specifically?
It was very interesting because, the Vitalis are people who came back in the 30s. No. So they had nothing to do whatsoever with anything going on in Europe. But as so often happens in wartime, you know, on the good side, everybody in Nelson really jumped into the idea of supporting the war effort. I mean, it was, you know, for a little town, there wasn't a single person who wasn't doing something for the war effort in one way or another. And so what happens, that's the good side, you know, let's defeat Herr Hitler and all of that. But on the bad side is this kind of suspicion and prejudice about people who belong to that other side, you know. So they're, you know, Germans got not great treatment in the prairies, and you know, that's what happens here, is they look suspiciously suddenly on people who've been their neighbors the whole time. You know, they're Italians. How do we know they're not communicating with people in Italy and kind of giving away what's going on here, that sort of thing, right? And of course, we all know what happened to the Japanese as well. So I think that's the sort of bad side of that communal, you know, that joyous communal effort to do something positive has that backside that's not so positive, you know, where people are very suspicious of foreigners in general.
Well, as promised, let's talk a little bit about your new book. I haven't had a chance to read it because it's very, very big. But I'm looking forward to it. I'll probably set July out, pencil July in.
Oh, come on, it's not going to take a whole month.
And but what could you tell us about To Track a Traitor?
To Track a Traitor, you know, came out of a couple of things. One is that people are always asking me about Lane's sister. And, you know, Lane's sister is modeled a little bit, the whole business of Lane and her sister are modeled a little bit on my mother and her sister, who didn't terribly get along. And I blame the father for that. The father was not, you know, he was a great man, but he was not a particularly kind man. And I really wanted to explore what that was like for Lane, because Lane has been living in a complete kind of, you know, it's her world that she's created. And now suddenly here's her sister, and her sister's in need, and she has to go and find her sister who's sort of disappeared suddenly. So that was a big part of it. But there's also, you know, all of the stories in that book are all about what people bring back from wars, you know. So there's references to the First World War and leftover things from that. And there's, you know, the sister struggling with what she did during the war. Lane is still struggling with what she did. So it's quite imbued with that, I think. And I don't know, I think there's some very interesting stuff. And also I set part of it in Sussex at the at a beautiful walk called the Seven Sisters, which in fact my husband and I walked a couple of years ago. So I wanted Lane and Darling to have to walk that as well. And that's the picture on the front of the book, actually, is the Seven Sisters from the south side of it.
Oh, okay. I think she does a little traveling in this book.
Yes. Yep. She has to go to England. She has to you know, she has to employ all her spycraft to keep from being followed, because the institution, the you know, the War Office are after her sister because they believe she's a traitor, hence the title. But there is a traitor.
All right, it looks like maybe I should schedule it for June. I can't wait. All right, Iona, I wish you the best of luck. We'll have to wait about another 2 more weeks till May 25th to find out who won this very tough category, I think, this year. But you know, I'll be rooting for you because it was one of my favorite books last year. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm extremely proud to have been nominated, and it's been an absolute delight speaking with you.
And to everyone watching, thank you very much.